Carl Jung's most unsettling discovery was not about insanity, psychosis, or the familiar struggles of mental illness. Instead, it revolved around a rare kind of human being, a person who can see everything others fail to notice. People with this gift do not simply observe, they penetrate. They perceive the hidden reality beneath words, gestures, and appearances. They read the truths that most people unconsciously agree not to acknowledge. And according to Jung, this ability is as dangerous as it is extraordinary. In his clinical practice, Jung encountered patients who seemed to carry what he called differentiated perception. These people possessed an unusual faculty. They could detect micro-expressions, the flickers of emotion that pass across a face too quickly for the ordinary eye. They could sense when someone's tone of voice didn't match their inner state. They could perceive hidden tensions in the air, like invisible currents flowing through a room. These individuals didn't merely pick up on small signals. They understood the deeper meaning behind them. They instantly recognized when someone was lying. They sensed suppressed grief even when the person smiled. They could feel the unspoken resentments others carried like heavy shadows. Jung realized that this gift was not a blessing in the ordinary sense. He wrote that people with this kind of perception frequently ended up alone, exhausted, and socially isolated. It wasn't because they were broken or unstable. Rather, it was because seeing too much made it nearly impossible for them to function in the same way ordinary people did. Think about it. Society depends on certain unspoken agreements, on masks and polite deceptions that help everyone coexist. If you can see through those masks effortlessly, you don't just see reality. You threaten the structure that holds groups together. This is why Jung called this discovery dangerous. A patient who saw too much. The case that opened Jung's eyes to this strange phenomenon began in 1913, at a time when Jung himself was going through a profound psychological crisis. He had recently separated from Freud, which left him intellectually isolated and emotionally shaken. It was during this turbulent period that a patient came to him, someone whose abilities would permanently alter his understanding of the human psyche. She was, as Jung later described, a highly introverted and intuitive woman, the rarest type within his personality system. She possessed what he eventually named undifferentiated intuitive perception. This woman could walk into any room and instantly sense the psychological climate. Without a word being spoken, she knew who was hiding resentment, who was secretly depressed, who was faking confidence, and who was suppressing anger. Jung noted in his private writings, the patient displays an extraordinary capacity for perceiving unconscious contents in others. But this ability causes her great distress rather than benefit. Her extraordinary perception made ordinary life impossible. She could not tolerate small talk, because every casual conversation felt false to her. She struggled to maintain friendships, because people felt exposed and uncomfortable in her presence. She couldn't hold regular employment, because her awareness disrupted the collective illusions that groups rely on to function. Jung came to a startling realization. He wasn't treating a delusion. He wasn't treating madness. What he was witnessing was what happens when the unconscious becomes too conscious. This wasn't pathology. It was perception so heightened that it became a liability. The nature of differentiated perception. Jung documented that this patient often described people with uncanny precision. She spoke of them as though she had access to their private thoughts and hidden motivations. And when Jung carefully tested her impressions, he found that she was usually correct. This wasn't psychosis. It wasn't hallucination. It was perception advanced to such a level that it became socially dangerous. But there was a deeper problem. Jung began to ask himself, where does this ability come from? How could someone absorb so much psychological information about others without consciously trying? This question led him to explore what he later described as participation mystique. It is a phenomenon in which a person's psyche becomes so attuned to others that it unconsciously absorbs the hidden atmosphere around them, not just words and behaviors, but the entire emotional climate. Jung wrote in his Red Book notes, there are those among us whose psychic apparatus is so finely tuned that they absorb not merely conscious communications, but the entire unconscious atmosphere of their environment. In other words, these individuals acted like psychic antennas. They were not only aware of what people said or did, but also of the repressed material hidden beneath the surface, the unconscious material others didn't even know they were carrying. Modern echoes of Jung's observation. Interestingly, modern psychology has validated some aspects of Jung's early observation. Dr. Elaine Aron's research on highly sensitive persons shows that about 20% of people possess heightened sensitivity to emotional and sensory input. They process the world more deeply and react more strongly to subtleties others ignore. But Jung went further. He identified a subgroup within this sensitive population, the introverted intuitive type, which he estimated to be less than 1% of the population. These individuals didn't just feel deeply, they perceived unconscious patterns with razor-sharp clarity. They saw the sadness hidden behind forced smiles. They sensed desperation beneath confident speeches. They could feel the shadow of a group, all the unspoken, denied content that the group unconsciously agreed not to talk about. Jung wrote, "The danger lies not in the perception itself, but in the psychic isolation it creates. When one sees what others cannot or will not see, one becomes a mirror that society cannot bear to look into." This was the crux of the problem. The gift of perception, instead of bringing connection, created distance. The clearer their vision, the lonelier their lives became. The double-edged sword of perception. Jung eventually came to understand that the greatest danger of extraordinary perception wasn't merely the exhaustion or loneliness it caused. The deeper threat was that such individuals often became the targets of shadow projection. People, when confronted with parts of themselves they don't want to acknowledge, will often lash out at the mirror instead of facing the truth. In Psychology of the Unconscious, Jung explained, nothing has a stronger influence psychologically on their environment, and especially on their children, than the unlived life of the parent. But this principle extended beyond family. When someone with heightened perception reflected another person's hidden shadow, that person had two choices: either confront their denied truth or attack the one who revealed it. More often than not, they chose the latter. This meant that highly perceptive individuals weren't just lonely, they were often scapegoated. They became lightning rods for others' unacknowledged fears and insecurities. Carl Jung's most dangerous discovery was never about madness or delusion. It was about what happens when a person sees too much of what others miss. He realized that some people are born with a type of perception that is almost too clear for social survival. They sense unconscious emotions, hidden lies, and group tensions so deeply that others feel exposed in their presence. Instead of being celebrated for their clarity, they are often punished for it. Jung called this the problem of the superior function. When your greatest strength becomes your greatest burden, such people rarely struggle with insanity. They struggle with being the unwanted mirror of society. Others project their hidden flaws onto them, blaming them for disturbances they did not cause. Jung described this as shadow projection. When people cannot face their own hidden qualities, they attack those who reflect them back. For example, if a highly perceptive person notices that someone is insecure beneath their confidence, that observation might trigger anger rather than gratitude. Instead of acknowledging the truth, the other person lashes out at the mirror. Jung wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. But for most people, it is easier to attack the one who sees clearly than to accept painful truths." This dynamic creates what Jung called the scapegoat phenomenon. The individual with advanced perception becomes the designated problem of every group they join. They are not causing issues, they are simply pointing out what already exists in the unconscious. Yet they get treated as though they are the source. Families, workplaces, and communities often push these individuals aside because they reveal what everyone would rather keep hidden. It is no surprise, then, that they often feel like outcasts, misunderstood and even cursed. But Jung's work did not stop there. He noticed that this rare gift of perception did not appear in just one form. Instead, it manifested in four distinct patterns of the introverted intuitive type. Each type processes unconscious material in a different way, which brings both unique challenges and unique strengths. Type 1. The feeling intuitive. These individuals combine deep intuition with a strong emotional sensitivity. They don't just notice hidden emotions, they feel them in their own bodies. For example, if someone in the room is anxious, the feeling intuitive may suddenly feel anxious themselves, without knowing why. Jung described this as emotional contagion. They absorb the unspoken emotions of others so thoroughly that it becomes difficult to know where their own feelings end and others begin. Their gift is empathy, but their danger is emotional overwhelm. Type 2. The thinking intuitive. This type sees unconscious patterns in a more rational and predictive way. They can often forecast events long before they unfold. Without any hard evidence, they sense the trajectory of relationships, careers, or personal struggles. Jung noted that such individuals were sometimes frighteningly accurate. They seem to know the ending of the story before anyone else has even recognized the beginning. Their strength is foresight, but their struggle is that few people believe them until it's too late. Type 3. The sensation intuitive. For this type, the body becomes the receiver of unconscious signals. They can pick up on physical manifestations of hidden emotions, tension, fatigue, even the early signs of illness. Before someone admits they are unwell, the sensation intuitive already knows. They act almost like early warning systems for both emotional and physical disturbances. Their strength lies in their awareness of the body-mind connection, but their challenge is carrying the weight of constant vigilance. Type 4, the pure intuitive. This is the rarest and most difficult type Jung encountered. The pure intuitive sees everything: emotions, patterns, atmospheres, but struggles to organize or express it clearly. They are flooded with impressions without the psychological structure to make sense of them. Life feels like standing in the middle of a storm of perceptions with no shelter. Jung described them as living in perpetual overwhelm. Their strength is raw perception, but their danger is paralysis and confusion. Jung stressed that understanding which type you are is critical. Each requires a different path toward what he called integration, the process of balancing one's gifts so they do not destroy the self. Without integration, superior perception leads to exhaustion, isolation, and collapse. With integration, however, it becomes a tool not just for survival, but for transformation. Why did Jung call this discovery dangerous? Because seeing too much destabilizes the very fabric of collective life. Societies and groups rely on unspoken agreements, illusions that keep people comfortable. The highly perceptive individual breaks those illusions simply by existing. Families want to ignore certain truths. Workplaces want to hide dysfunction. Societies want to overlook their collective shadow. When someone comes along who sees through all of it, their presence threatens the fragile balance. That is why they are often cast out, not for being wrong, but for being too right. Jung identified three main dangers that make this kind of perception so destructive. Collective disruption. These individuals see through the illusions that hold groups together. They destabilize social harmony simply by pointing out what others would prefer to ignore. Psychological isolation. Because few people can relate to their perceptions, they end up feeling like aliens in their own communities, living in a reality others cannot see. Identity loss. Perhaps most dangerously, when they absorb too much of others' unconscious material, they risk losing touch with their own authentic self. Jung called this participation mystique, where the boundaries between self and others dissolve. To Jung, this was not a sign of mental illness. It was a sign of consciousness evolving beyond what the collective was ready to handle. But evolution without guidance can lead to destruction. That is why he developed his process of individuation, teaching these rare individuals how to carry their gift without being consumed by it. In Part 3, we will explore Jung's roadmap for integration, how people with this extraordinary perception can transform their curse into wisdom and their burden into a contribution for humanity. Carl Jung believed that extraordinary perception was not an illness, but a challenge. The problem was not that these individuals saw too much, but that they lacked the psychological tools to manage what they saw. His solution was the process. He called individuation a lifelong journey of becoming fully oneself while maintaining balance with the unconscious. For people with superior perception, individuation was not optional. Without it, they risked being overwhelmed, isolated, or even destroyed by the very gift they carried. With it, however, they could transform their ability into wisdom that could serve both themselves and society. Phase 1. Recognition and differentiation. The first step Jung taught was recognition. Many highly perceptive people mistake others' emotions and thoughts as their own. They carry sadness, anger, or anxiety without realizing it doesn't belong to them. Jung stressed the need for conscious discrimination, the ability to separate what is mine from what is theirs. He encouraged daily solitude. In silence, the absorbed material would settle, allowing the individual to hear their own authentic voice. This simple practice created the foundation of self-awareness. Without it, the person remained entangled in the unconscious content of everyone around them. Jung wrote, "The first task is to establish what belongs to you and what belongs to others. Without this discrimination, there can be no individual development." Phase 2. Shadow integration. Once recognition begins, the next challenge is the shadow. Jung discovered that those who see the shadows of others most clearly often have unresolved shadows of their own. For example, a person who is deeply disturbed by lies may still carry dishonesty within themselves. The clearer they see it in others, the more likely they are avoiding it in themselves. Shadow integration means accepting that you contain the same human qualities. You notice in the world around you both light and dark. This acceptance reduces judgment and defensiveness. Instead of being overwhelmed by other people's flaws, you learn to see them as mirrors of your own potential. Jung famously wrote, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This step is about turning perception inward, so that the gift of clarity doesn't turn into arrogance or bitterness. Phase 3. Conscious Participation. After recognition and shadow work, the final step is learning conscious participation, engaging with others' unconscious material without being swallowed by it. Jung described this as becoming a bridge between the conscious and unconscious. The perceptive person can hold insights about others without losing themselves in the process. This required what Jung called psychological containers. These are mental boundaries that allow you to hold others' emotions temporarily, without confusing them with your own. For example, a counselor might deeply empathize with a client's pain, but still know that the sadness does not belong to them. The goal is not to suppress perception, but to use it constructively. When practiced well, the individual no longer feels cursed by their gift. Instead, they feel empowered to use it with intention. Historical lessons, collapse versus integration. Jung often illustrated this struggle with examples from history. One of the most striking was the philosopher Nietzsche. Nietzsche possessed extraordinary perception. He saw through social, religious, and cultural illusions with piercing clarity, but he never learned to integrate his insights. Instead of using his perception for healing, he wielded it like a weapon against society. His brilliance isolated him, and eventually, he collapsed into psychological breakdown. For Jung, Nietzsche was an example of what happens when perception outruns integration. In contrast, Jung admired Meister Eckhart, a medieval mystic. Eckhart also had profound insight into psychological and spiritual realities, but instead of overwhelming people, he communicated with compassion and humility. He transformed perception into wisdom, offering it in ways others could absorb. His humility allowed him to connect rather than isolate. Jung saw these two figures as lessons. Perception alone does not determine destiny. What matters is whether the gift is integrated with balance, humility, and purpose. Jung's own crisis. Perhaps the most important case study was Jung himself. After his break with Freud in 1913, Jung entered what he later described as his confrontation with the unconscious. He was flooded with visions, dreams, and overwhelming perceptions that threatened to destroy his sanity. He admitted, "I was menaced by a psychosis and was saved only by my ability to understand what was happening to me through my work with patients." Instead of collapsing, Jung used the individuation process on himself. He documented his experiences in what became the Red Book. By engaging with his visions consciously, he transformed them into insights that shaped all his later work. His survival was proof that overwhelming perception could be integrated and even used for creative breakthroughs. The need for safe relationships. Jung emphasized that no one could integrate perception alone, because these individuals often feel alien in the world. They desperately need what Jung called the few who understand relationships with people who can witness their authenticity without fear or judgment. He identified 3 kinds of relationships that were essential. Fellow individuated people. Those who have gone through individuation themselves. They recognize authenticity instantly and can meet it with respect. Seekers of growth. People who may not be as perceptive, but who are committed to self-discovery through therapy, spiritual practice, or inner work. Natural containers. Mature individuals who can hold psychological complexity without being overwhelmed, even if they don't share the same perception. Finding these relationships is rare but crucial. Without them, the perceptive individual risks sinking deeper into isolation. With them, they gain a sense of belonging and balance. Gradual revelation. Jung even outlined a method for sharing perception carefully. He called it a gradual revelation protocol. Instead of overwhelming people with raw insights, he advised, begin with small, gentle observations. Notice the other person's response, defensive or curious. Increase depth slowly based on their ability to handle it. Frame insights as invitations, not attacks. This way, the perceptive individual does not become a threat but a guide. Their gift becomes easier for others to accept. From isolation to contribution. Jung believed that when integrated, superior perception serves not only the individual, but the entire culture. He called such people carriers of the living spirit, individuals who push consciousness forward by seeing what others cannot. Instead of being destroyed by their gift, they become contributors to humanity's growth. The journey, however, is not easy. Integration requires discipline, humility, and constant attention. But for Jung, the alternative, living unintegrated, was far more dangerous. In Part 4, we will explore the final stage of this journey, the pitfalls that threaten integration, the practices that sustain it, and the ultimate purpose Jung saw for these rare individuals in the evolution of human consciousness. In the last sections, we traced Carl Jung's understanding of those rare individuals who see what others cannot. We saw how this extraordinary perception can be both a gift and a curse, how it isolates people, and how individuation offers a path to balance. Yet Jung warned that integration is never finished. Even after achieving some stability, the danger remains. The individual may still collapse under the weight of their vision, if they are careless. This final part explores the pitfalls that threaten integration, the practices needed to sustain it, and the higher purpose Jung believed these individuals serve in the evolution of consciousness. Pitfall 1. Inflation. One of Jung's greatest warnings was against inflation. Inflation happens when someone mistakes their extraordinary perception for personal superiority. They begin to see themselves as chosen, prophetic, or above others, while their insights may be real. The ego expands and swells until it disconnects them from humility. Jung observed this in mystics, leaders, and even therapists. Some, after gaining deep insights, start preaching rather than listening. They turn into gurus who demand worship instead of guides who encourage self-discovery. This inflation is dangerous because it separates the individual from reality. Eventually, the inflated bubble bursts, often with devastating consequences. The antidote, Jung taught, is humility and grounding. No matter how deep your vision, you remain human. You still eat, sleep, suffer, and die like everyone else. Remembering your ordinariness is essential for keeping perception healthy. Pitfall 2. Withdrawal into isolation. Another danger is total withdrawal. Because the world often resists uncomfortable truths, perceptive individuals may retreat completely. They stop sharing, stop connecting, and live in silence. While solitude is useful, permanent withdrawal starves the gift of purpose. Jung emphasized that perception grows stale when it serves no one. Like water that stops flowing, it stagnates. Individuals who isolate for too long risk turning their insights into obsessions, endlessly circling their own thoughts without fresh input. The remedy is balanced engagement, even if most people resist. The perceptive individual must find at least a few safe spaces where they can contribute. Serving even one person authentically keeps the gift alive and prevents isolation from becoming decay. Pitfall 3. Over-identification with darkness. Jung noticed that highly perceptive people sometimes become fixated on darkness. Because they see hypocrisy, corruption, and shadow so clearly, they begin to believe the whole world is rotten. This pessimism can spiral into cynicism or despair. Jung argued that this is a distortion. While it is true that darkness exists, so does light. To see only one side is just as unbalanced as to deny it. Integration requires the courage to acknowledge both the cruelty and the kindness, the lies and the truths, the failures and the triumphs. He wrote, "The world is not only evil, it is also good, not only ugly, but also beautiful." Maintaining this dual vision keeps perception whole. Practices to sustain the gift. So how can someone with extraordinary perception avoid these pitfalls and sustain balance? Jung outlined several key practices. Daily self-reflection, a short period of journaling or meditation to sort out what belongs to you and what belongs to others. This prevents entanglement. Creative expression, art, writing, or music gives unconscious material a safe outlet. Jung himself painted and wrote extensively to stabilize his inner world. Grounding in the physical exercise, nature walks, and manual tasks like gardening or cooking connect perception back to the body and the earth. Trusted companionship, at least one friend, therapist, or mentor who can listen without judgment. Even the most insightful person needs witnesses. Service to others, using perception not for pride but for contribution. Whether through therapy, teaching, art, or quiet guidance, the gift stays healthy when it serves. Jung insisted that these practices were not luxuries but necessities. Without them, the individual risked being consumed by their own depth. The higher purpose, carriers of the future. Why endure such difficulty? Why bear a gift that isolates, burdens, and even threatens sanity? For Jung, the answer was clear. Individuals with extraordinary perception serve as carriers of the future. He believed that human consciousness evolves not through the masses, but through a few individuals who see ahead of their time. These people glimpse truths that others deny, and though they may be rejected, their vision slowly seeps into culture. History is full of such figures: prophets, poets, philosophers, reformers. At first, they are mocked or ignored, but decades later, society recognizes their insight as wisdom. Jung believed this was the role of those who see differently, not to be comfortable, but to be pioneers of the psyche. He wrote, "The individual is the bearer of culture. Without individuals who carry the living spirit, civilization decays." Thus, the suffering of these individuals has meaning. Their struggle is not only personal but collective. By surviving their own gift, they contribute to humanity's growth. The courage to see. Perhaps the most profound lesson Jung left us is this: Seeing what others don't is dangerous, but refusing to see is far worse. Most people cling to illusions because they feel safe, but illusions cannot last. Eventually, truth surfaces, and those who refuse to see are shattered by it. The perceptive individual, though burdened early, is prepared. Their suffering teaches them resilience. Their vision helps others navigate realities that would otherwise destroy them. In this sense, extraordinary perception is both a cross and a crown. It demands sacrifice but offers wisdom. It isolates but also connects at the deepest level. It wounds but can also heal. Closing reflections to walk Jung's path is to accept complexity. The world is both beautiful and brutal. People are both honest and deceptive, and we ourselves are both light and shadow. Those who see too much are not cursed, they are called. Their calling is to endure what others cannot, to integrate what others deny, and to speak what others avoid. They will never have an easy life, but they may have a meaningful one. So if you are one of these individuals, take courage. You are not broken. You are not alone. You are walking a path that has been walked before by Jung himself, by mystics, by visionaries. Your task is not to escape your gift, but to integrate it. And when you do, you may find that what once felt like a curse becomes your greatest contribution.